The town of Ravenswood was a peaceful place, a small grouping of houses surrounding a large tree. It was atop a hill on a lush, green meadow among abundant but docile wildlife. Things were calm until some unforeseen tragedy happened. It was harvest season and somehow a huge portion of the crops had disappeared. It was terrible but, fortunately, not catastrophic. It would have caused more panic, but the village was preparing for the arrival of a new priest. So when the priest arrived in Ravenswood, it was one of mixed emotions. On one hand, they were excited to have a new spiritual leader to help guide their faith. However, the villagers were still anxious about the new arrival, as they had heard of strange happenings in the surrounding towns. They had heard stories of creatures behaving aggressively, believing that was the cause of their missing crops.
I heard that wild pigs are stealing crops.
A farmer said to his wife. They had worked hard to cultivate their fields, and now a huge portion of the fruits of their labor were missing. They were unsure of what could have caused such a thing to happen, and some began to whisper, believing his arrival was a sign of something more sinister. The new priest, however, was well aware of all the sudden suspicious activity, and knew what was ahead of him. He knew he had to not only help the parishioners come to terms with this mysterious loss, but also provide guidance and reassurance in the face of the unknown. By the end of the day, when all chores were done, the chapel became filled. Villagers were anxiously awaiting the sermon of the new priest. Some were unsure of what to expect, while others held out hope that the new priest would have answers to the strange occurrences that had been plaguing their town. When the new priest walked boldly into the chapel, the village grew silent. The tall, imposing man, dressed in black robes, had a stern look on his face, and the villagers could sense that he was not one to be trifled with. The villagers greeted him with a mix of fear and reverence, unsure of what to make of this new figure.
Despite all the odd happenings here in Ravenswood, I ask that we all sit and discuss it all amicably.
He spoke loudly and confidently to the entire village of Ravenswood, insisting that the Lord had spoke to him directly and was sure he was the one to help them in their hour of need. He explained that he had been sent by the Vatican to not only help with this chapel but to completely investigate the strange happenings in the entire area. He demanded that they put their faith in him, and that together they would be able to overcome whatever was threatening their community. The villagers were initially hesitant to accept the new priest, but they could sense that he was a powerful force. They knew that they needed his help if they were going to survive the strange occurrences that had been plaguing their town. The new priest got to work immediately, determined to find out exactly what was happening in Ravenswood. His first official day he observed the local rabbits, normally timid and skittish creatures. The priest was shocked at how they had begun to act aggressively towards the local wolves. He would watch as they would chase down lone wolves, as a group, nipping and biting at them with a ferocity that was completely unnatural. At first, the townsfolk tried to convince the priest that it was just a strange quirk of nature. They initially felt more concerned with how they would make it through winter with such a reduced harvest. But, as the attacks became more frequent and more violent, they began to realize that something was very, very wrong. Despite the priest being reassuring, the villagers became ever more confused and scared. They had never seen anything like this before, and it was not long before villagers began to speak out boldly.
It could be an omen of some sort for our lack of faith,
said one panicked villager, while others thought that it might be directly tied to the arrival of the priest. The rumors started to spread, and soon the entire village had some personal theory about the strange behavior of the rabbits. The town was feeling uneasy and knew that something was not right. They were determined to find out what was causing this strange behavior of the rabbits. One night, a brave group of 3 took it upon themselves to venture into the meadows to investigate the strange behavior of the rabbits. They did not return from the meadow, but the next day, the rabbits were gone. The villagers were completely confused.
They were called by Satan to be sacrificed. We are safe now,
one person said in response to their disappearance. Unfortunately, they were not safe. The problem grew worse. Now the terrifying rabbits were replaced by hordes of grotesque, twisted, black membranes spewing up from the ground. That made the remaining villagers petrified. They had never seen anything like this before. Even stories of monsters and creatures from folklore were nothing like what they were seeing before them. The villagers knew that something terrible was happening. The missing villagers were only the beginning, and that it was only a matter of time before it came for them as well. They turned to the priest, and he had a stern answer for them.
This is not the work of the devil. That is merely a caricature. This is the work of something far more ancient and powerful. The great old one has awakened,
he said gravely.
It seemed to have chosen the rabbits as its heralds, sent in great number to prepare the way for its return. It Its true form is beginning to reemerge. We must sacrifice to it, or it will consume us all.
The townsfolk were mortified at the thought of sacrificing to such a monstrous being,
Who will be this sacrifice?
but they knew they had few options and no answers. The village knew that they had to do something to stop this terrible being from destroying their town. The toughest of them all formed a group to go and face the threat. They armed themselves with whatever weapons they could find and set out to the meadows where the twisted creatures were coming from. The priest tried to warn them.
Fighting will only bring more pain.
He argued, but the town was frenzied. The battle was fierce and terrifying. The village fought bravely against the twisted creatures, but they were outnumbered and outmatched. They were no match for the old god, and in the end, only a handful of the villagers survived the onslaught. They were the ones chosen, unknowingly, to serve as the old god's new herald, forever bound to its will. The dead had their souls devoured by the monstrous being. When the dust had settled, the townsfolk were left with a heavy heart, mourning the loss of their friends and family. It was then that the priest stepped forward and declared that he would be the one to take on the task of sacrificing himself to the old god.
I know, I have encouraged you all to be strong, but I have failed you. I will not stand to see another one of you perish. Tonight, I will walk into the meadow and face the beast myself.
He knew that the villagers were scared and desperate for a solution, and he knew that the only way to preserve them was to give himself for their cause. He willingly walked into the meadow the following night, and was never seen again. The villagers of Ravenswood were left in shock. The terror they had faced was now over and their town was placid again. They honestly had suspected the priest as the cause of the discord, but his ultimate sacrifice completely proved them wrong. As the remaining villagers slowly began to recover from their grief and loss, again something strange emerged. Their paranoia returned. They feared that the terror would return within another one of the surrounding villages. The peace and tranquility of Ravenswood was short-lived. A powerful curse had been set over those villagers' hearts, causing them to crusade into other villages with that very fear that had brought them peril.